from a Western eye, like what after you read the story, do you think there's something that is understandable, it resonate with you, with the story?
Oh, look, yes, absolutely. Because, as you know, I live in New Zealand, but I grew up in the Pacific Islands, Fiji, very small. I mean, you could say my island's the size of Beijing. I don't know. But, or maybe
bigger.
Still.
Bigger,
but I resonate with the story because, I think we're no different from other parts of other cultures, other people in the world. There's always layers of existence. There's the natural world and there's the spiritual world, and there's and so the two are always aligned. And so I grew up with fantastic stories of magic and dark stories. And so I celebrate Fang Shan more than I do, say, stories like, I resonate better with stories like Fang Shan more than stories like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Because Lord of the Rings is too hard to understand sometimes,
Yes, it is, especially for the Chinese culture.
Yes, that's right.
Like us, sometimes it's harder to understand the Lord of the Rings. But I believe it will be the same when people trying to read the Feng Shan, right?
I understand. See, one of the things that one of the things I've often thought about is, it was easy to believe that Lord of the Rings was a fantasy because of the scale, the castles that they built, the numbers. It was like, wow, okay, well and the fact that people look like creatures. That's easy to put into fantasy, and because I've never seen castles built like they were in Lord of the Rings, the castles that I've seen, and are average, I guess, people, and so one of the things that was amazing about Fang Shan, when we started to see the sets, and then when you stand in China and you look at the history and the scale. And you think, this is not fantasy, some of this. Some of this fantastic ideas are based in real geographical, life-size environments. You stand on the wall, to be at the Forbidden City in Beijing and to look at the size, the scale of that city, and to stand at the Great Wall and look at that's not something you build in a year. These are something that takes. It goes through generations. It takes big vision and big ideas, and so to put the spiritual dimension to that's more resonates with me, because I can see the relationship between the spiritual world and the physical world.
It was reality.
And so Fang Shan in that sense was like, it was easy for me to sort of appreciate the links between those two things. So I think the discerning audience will get it, because right now I think you have, in the world that we live in with so much information, the West is particularly obsessed with science and truth, but it doesn't answer everything. It doesn't. Science, in some level, still needs a miracle for it to exist.
Because to us, I think, to me, Feng Shan is a very realistic world. Actually, just in a fantasy way of telling it. So it tells how back then in an empire, kind of like a emperor kind of ruling system, dictatorship. In another word, how do they manage themselves? How do they live through that? And it's still kind of picturing some of us today. And we had a little conversation while you were in Feng Shan, because I wanted to visit you. I was in the middle of traveling to another shooting in China, but I was so wanted to come and to visit the set and everything in Feng Shan, but I missed out the opportunity. But which I think what I remember from our conversation was you had a little like you were trying to figure out the reason of how these actions happening in function world, and I had this knowledge because I read the book, and I also I had watched the original version of the TV series, which one of my favorite, to be honest, and that got me into martial arts and stuff. So the reason I'm saying this is there any like cultural barrier that you need to get through it while you're working in that film, and while you are stunt coordinator, and you have to manage the action, which is a big part in function. It's an action movie. So when you manage the action and the character and stuff, does it like you find sometimes you find a bit lost in the culture aspect, or it doesn't?
It was one of the challenges I found working in China, and particularly on this project. It's not like this all the time. Again, is learning to, because the film industry is a business, and so there's one part is that you've got Chinese culture, and very specifically the people I know, and then you've got the film culture, and it's the film culture in China is very different in its own. It's got its own internal workings. One of the things that, as a Westerner coming into, we invest a lot into individual people, into the members of the team, and so one of the things that I guess it's a struggle was to find the balance between investing in individuals. Investing in individuals, because you want them to become better in what they do, and of course if one person is good, and hopefully they will share that, but also understanding the hierarchy within the team and within the people that you want, because your time is precious as somebody who's coming from out of town, and when you have a team of 100 people or whatever the number is that day, but often what happens in the work, the rule that I operate with, if you have 10 people, 3 people are doing the work that matters most. Or if you have 100 people, if you have 100 people on screen, your eyes only registers with about 20. So that's kind of the way that works. I mean, it's just there's just so much happening in a fight. You don't see all the details, but every person watching is looking at different parts of the story. So you want to make sure that when you're putting together a sequence, that every part of the screen works. Because the audience now has a much bigger TV, and they're only bigger screen, and they're watching different parts, and they're coming to watch a movie with different expectations. So yes, it is very important. So the underlying thing is that we need to tell a story, and make sure the story is being told, and also that we're doing it well. And I often find, if I'm thinking about that on set, then I've forgotten something very important in my preparation. So I don't worry about that when we're shooting.
Okay, I see.
So that's
you got the key people to look after the cultural aspect.
Yes, that's right.
The movement of the characters, and make sure they look Chinese.
Well, they look Chinese. And also, one of the things that, because we're shooting a fantasy, we very rarely work in places, unless we were touching and interacting with it, like horses and out in the fields and castle walls. There was very few places that you could touch and interact with, because so much of it was going to be added into the visual, into the blue screen background. So in some respects, that made my job easier, because we understand that when I look at some of the conceptual artwork and some of the previs, it's like, wow, this is going to be magical. But we're looking after this part of the screen, and for some of those bigger sequences. So that helped streamline the way I treated things. I mean, so that was a great help.